So, do you see people as decisive? How about innovative, creative? What about you're the kind of leader who simplifies really complex problems? What if those strengths, those things that guide you into leadership, are quietly pushing you towards making the wrong decisions? Hi, I'm Bruce Spurlock, a physician and healthcare leader committed to helping physicians and professionals alike navigate change with clarity. And on viral healthcare, we look at the ideas spreading across healthcare and see what it takes to implement them both wisely and sustainably. So today, we're focusing on this area that is about who you are and the pressures that affect you and your decision making processes, skills, capabilities, and approach. Last episode, we looked at your own personalities. What were the kinds of things? Are you a risk taker? Are you a data detailed kind of person? This one, I want to talk a little bit about sort of taking that and going to the next level. So, if you think about it, some of the healthcare leaders probably have taken the Myers-Briggs inventory, or you've done personality tests, or you've had enough time in leadership that you're experienced with the kinds of decisions that you're making, the kinds of ways you approach it. You might have a little bit of insight into what we were talking about on our last episode. This time I want to talk about things that might have occurred over those weeks, months, years, decades, where you've developed these characteristics that may actually push you in the wrong direction. So let me ask this question: what gets rewarded in healthcare leadership? What are the desirable traits about a healthcare leader? Think about it for a second. If you're hiring someone into a leadership role, what do you look for? Well, I guess probably a lot of people would look for things like themselves, because if you're successful, some of those same characteristics in others might help them be successful as well. But think about it for a second. What are those characteristics that you think get rewarded or that you would like to reward, like decisiveness? Or how about innovation? How about confidence? Yeah, you make decisions with confidence. Or how about somebody who can see a lot of complexity and get their arms around it and describe it in relatively simple kinds of ways? In general, these are really good traits. These are things that are very valuable, and that people in healthcare, especially if you're moving up or you're going from a job with lower responsibilities to greater responsibilities, are often highly rewarded. They're the things that you need to build if you don't have some of those kinds of capabilities. How about, though, when these strengths become pressure? Internal pressure that you're not necessarily even aware of. What if the traits become expectations? These sort of things, these voices in your head that you may not even know exist. Things like, I need to have the answer. I tell you, I felt this many times. People are looking to me and I have to have an answer. And in some ways, you're kind of trained to have an answer, but a lot of times you're probably shooting from the hip, or maybe you're doing like, this is what I did last time, and so this is what we're going to do this time. But there's this pressure to say, I need to know, that people are depending on me to know. There's a pressure or a voice that says, I should move quickly. Or maybe there's one like, I need to be ahead of others. I need to be out front, because that's what truly good leaders do. They're the people that really get out in front of everybody else, pull people behind them into the future. And that's really what it means to be successful. So what happens if you stop choosing these traits and you start performing them? Interesting change of way to look at it. Becomes performance rather than really the kinds of things that I should be doing on a regular basis. Here's a reason. Here's what happens. Over time, you may develop what I call a hidden audience. It's not really an audience, but it's an audience in your voice, in your head. It's this part of your brain that says, this is how you expect yourself to behave, to sort of think well of yourself as a human being. But they're real people that can fit into this hidden audience. What about board members? You want your board members, let's say, if you're running a board, to have a certain perception of your capabilities, of your decisiveness, of your strengths, of your ability to command and be a leader. That's powerful. How about your peers? We suddenly don't think about peers, but if we're in a meeting with a group of peers, whether it's in our organization or in some type of external peer type, affinity type organization, they have some expectations, and you may be projecting in your head onto them the expectations that you have for yourself. How about industry expectation? Yeah, there's a lot of people moving up and moving to different places where it's expected that you can be decisive, innovative, creative, simplify complexity, a lot of these other things. How about your own internal identity? How about it's like an expectation I have because of what my parents said or did when I was a kid, or maybe my siblings. Maybe you have a sibling that has a certain trait that you value that you thought was always less when you were growing up. These kind of things that shape us and we may not even be aware of force us into taking a strength and putting pressure on us that we have to act in certain ways. So what does this do? How does this get into this our topic of decision making, jumping on something just because it's sexy and hot and viral? It actually increases the speed of decisions. And sometimes, if you're not comfortable with risk, it makes you more comfortable accepting risk. So it increases kind of your appetite for risk. It stops this willingness to pause. We've talked about that in other episodes about how you need to stand back and pause. And sort of the velocity of what's going on is kind of built in and pre-wired into your brain as something that's developed over time, an internal characteristic. This is separate from personality types or the kinds of risk taking or detail oriented that we talked about last time. This is something that's sort of layered upon layer to where you may not even realize you have these kinds of things going on. So how does this show up in real decisions? How do you push it potentially within your own organization? You push for faster timelines. I know I've done this. I want our company, I want me to feel like I'm very facile, very light and able to move on a dime. That's something that is a high priority to me. And I think sometimes I actually push my deadlines to kind of keep that trait going on. That's often valuable, but it can also obviously create danger, bad decisions, those kinds of things. It makes you want to jump on trends that appear to be innovative. Boy, this is really clever. Oh, look at the neat kind of way they've done it. Oh, this has got a lot of flash. Oh, that graphic interface looks really, really easy to jump on, to be able to use. So it helps you jump on those trends, and it can oversimplify really complex problems. They can be seemingly clear. And as we've talked about in developing frameworks, you really need to break all of those things down because the complexity is a nature of some of these changes. So these decisions really can look good externally. They can look good to other people, but they may not be operationally sound. And you may skip critical thinking, again, not because you're not good at it. It's, in fact, it may be something that because you become good at certain decisions, you overtrust some of those things that brought you to that in the first place. So you need to get your identity out of the way and get judgment back into it. Leaders truly start asking what's the right decision instead of what decision reflects who I'm supposed to be or who my organization is supposed to be or how I want people to think of me. It's a subtle change, but super powerful, super powerful. We've spent a little bit of time talking about looking externally, looking at the innovation itself, looking at these frameworks we talked about. But this is when that you need to look internally about. And a lot of times we don't spend any time doing that. We have such a busy schedule, meeting after meeting, call after call, activity, tasks, that we don't step back as leaders and say, boy, how am I approaching this? What are my characteristics that may be getting in the way of all these different things? Think about episode 5. We spent a lot of time talking about what is hype versus reality, how organizations that sell some of these ideas or promote some of these ideas, like we did these great work at these conferences and meetings, not necessarily combined with the reality. Sometimes, as we talked about in episode 5, the hype versus reality, that people tell you a lot of what they did and not so much what the outcomes were, or the outcomes were things that were not replicable. In episode 8, we talked about stepping back and anticipating failure and doing like the pre-mortem, sort of like we're going to definitely fail. And if we are going to fail, this is how we're going to do it. And I'm going to allow myself to fail because that's going to find the landmines, the potholes, the challenges that we're going to be able to do. And then we talked about different decision frameworks. We spent a lot of time on the Heath brothers RAP approach to do that. We'll come back to some of those in the future. But I think the whole idea is this was looking at the outside. So the issue is even with good frameworks, your own identity, your own expectations, your own internal sort of positional biases, should we call them, can override them. Really weird to think about this. I know I've made this mistake many times, and it didn't happen early on. It happened more in my journey when I was more experienced. And sometimes even now, even after all these years of making decisions, trying to make the right decisions, going through the process, doing it, I keep running into my own self. And I keep having to learn that's a tendency or a problem or some kind of image that I'm trying to project to others, this hidden audience. I don't even know who they are sometimes, but it's a hidden audience out there that really, I think, needs to hear it because it's how I define success in my own mind, how I define who I am, why I'm here, why I should be here. I mean, we all have some of these. We don't deserve this. We have, ways of thinking that we're not ready for it, we're not worthy of it, and so we try to do that. So these not really literal voices, but these internal voices of expectation, self-image, and past reinforcement. It's amazing. I'll bet some of these go back to when I was a kid and I didn't pass a test or I didn't win in some sporting event that sort of generated this lack of worthiness and the reason I have to work so hard and the reason I have to do that. I don't know this. I've never gone to anybody to talk about it, but probably deep down there are things that I don't even understand about why I do this, and so that's really important for you to think about that as well. Good leaders act quickly. That's a phrase that I've probably gotten away from more recently as I've started to study. I should already know the answer. This one started in medical school for me. No question that you have this expectation that you have expertise, you have knowledge. And then in business, it's like, I'm still young when I'm doing this, but I'm expected to know everything. And then another phrase that I think we should be cautious of, if I hesitate, I'll look weak. If I pause, it'll make me look indecisive. These shape us unconsciously. So what's the solution? How do we get ourselves out of that? It's impossible to go back and rewrite your childhood. I can, and I just have to be aware of them. I can't remove them, but I have to recognize that these are characteristics of me. You have to kind of build in time in your schedule to think about it. You have to get away. I mean, part of the reason for retreats and those things are to sort of be able to have that self-reflection time, because we often put self-reflection at the very, very bottom. And part of it's because we don't need it. We assume that we've got it worked on. If we've been leaders for several years, it's like, yeah, I already know the self-reflection thing. I don't need to go back and relearn those things. And I find, and I think the literature supports, that relearning and re-reflecting on who you are is important to be able to do that. So this is purposeful. You cannot just assume that you're going to be able to manage these biases, these internal voices, these hidden audiences. This is something that you have to plan, expect, build time in, put into your decision-making process, getting away. And maybe you need to get away with your team. Maybe you need to get away with just the decision makers. Maybe the whole idea is, as the Heath brothers talk about, widening your perspective is part of that process of removing and getting distance from who you are and who you've been. So is this the question I would ask you is, am I making this decision or am I performing it? That's ultimately what it wants to do. And if you ask that question, that alone will create some space for you. So here's the big takeaway from this week. It's not bad ideas. It's not bad innovations. It's not bad projects, platforms, whatever you want to call it. That's not the biggest risk. The biggest risk is this invisible pressure inside of us, inside good leaders, that shapes us and drives us into making bad, hurried, rushed, oversimplified decisions. And that's something we can control, or at least we can be aware of and put into the process purposefully, intentionally, to make that happen. So the next time you're making a decision, I really want you to ask yourself, is this the right move for the situation or the right move for how I want to be seen? What's the image that I'm trying to project with this decision? Because you are always, always, always trying to figure out how it makes you look. Even if you don't think about it, it does. So I want to thank you for listening to Viral Healthcare. If this conversation was useful to you, share with a colleague who's navigating change. And if you'd like more thoughtful conversations about the ideas shaping healthcare, be sure to follow the show. And importantly, I'd love to include your ideas. I'd love to think about those. So send them to me. We'll talk about them. I'd love to understand what problems you're facing. Maybe you had some catastrophes. We're going to talk about in the future some of the ones that I've had that were looked great on paper, started off and took off and became viral, and then ultimately were not sustainable. So I'm Bruce Spurlock, and I'll see you next time.